every year the continent spends some $20 billion to bring in the kind of cereals, wheat, rice, and other staples that people need to feed themselves within the continent. And the projection is that it's going to double by 2020. The demand is going to double by 2020.
At the moment, just 5% of Africa's imports of food staples, of grains, comes from African farmers themselves. The rest is coming from outside of Africa. Yet there's enormous potential for African farmers to satisfy the demand for food. Yields in Africa are much, much lower than the rest of the world. A third, a half of what farmers in other developing countries are achieving. And a very small fraction of the amount of land that can be cultivated in Africa is actually being cultivated for food. So there's enormous potential to increase output. But to do that, African farmers need incentives to do that. And often the nearest market, the nearest large market for farmers is across a border. And constraints on trade, rules and regulations, very much hampering African farmers in getting their food across borders, limiting the incentives that they have to invest in new seeds, to invest in fertilizers, and to increase their output and productivity. What we'd like to see is a much more open and inclusive dialogue and discussion about food and food trade policies in Africa. Often at the moment, the groups involved are very small. Often decisions are made in government without including the relevant stakeholders. So a key objective for this report really is to encourage a much more open dialogue and provide the inputs that are necessary to bring all the stakeholders to the table.